Hey, business owners. You're about to watch a presentation that was made for the AI Marketing Summit, and it is entitled How to Get 30 Appointments in 30 Days with AI Cold Outreach. Without further ado, let's begin. All right, everyone, let's rock and roll. Getting 30 appointments in 30 days with AI-empowered cold email outreach. First of all, who the heck am I and why should you be listening to me? So my name is Gareth Tate, and I have 10 plus years of experience in cold outreach. Basically, what that means is I've built 4 businesses on the back of cold email outreach. You can see their logos below. And for the last 6 years, I've worked inside of software development. It was a really big pivot for me switching from marketing to software development, but I'm very glad I did because it put me ahead of the wave with regards to AI. So for about 6 years, we built different software products, some of them involving AI. And when large language models hit the scene, I realized that we could take our skill set in software development and apply it to marketing services, specifically in the world of cold outreach and cold email outreach. Basically, we don't have any special tools or any special know-how that anyone else doesn't have, but we bring a very different architecture and a very different background to the world of cold email outreach. And that's what I want to share with you today. So far we've sent just this last year almost 1 million cold emails, all on autopilot using AI. Basically, what that means is that once we set up the engine just runs itself, and we're able to personalize and reach out to a lot of prospects at scale and able to get better results than most other people out there on the market, all without having to go through the daily grind of personalizing emails or tweaking the campaign day over day over day. So what you see below are our real numbers. You can see here the number of unique leads we have contacted, as well as the number of booked calls. So this particular client was actually just our most recent client, and we've been working with them for a couple months now. And you can see here, these were their very first weeks inside of our system, and was able to book them 30 calls within 30 days, which is something we're quite proud of. And so today I'm going to be sharing with you how we do what we do. In other words, I'm really going to be giving you the presentation that I wish I had when I started off on this journey. This is what works for us. Maybe it'll work for you also. Specifically, I'm going to be sharing with you what is AICO. AICO is the name of our cold email outreach system. And I'm going to be sharing with you the exact places where we scrape our leads, how we enrich our leads, how we set up the AI copywriting, how we set up the campaigns in Smartlead and warm up our mailboxes, and what are the associated costs. Now, the costs are something that's always in flux, but I'm going to be sharing with you the real costs that we really had in the beginning of our roadmap and the real costs associated with the tools I'm going to be sharing with you. Really, I'm going to be lifting the hood of the car and showing you exactly how we do what we do. So first, what is AICO? So AICO is our fully automated system that scrapes leads, finds email addresses, and creates customized cold copy at scale. It's good for B2B businesses and firms where the lifetime value of their customers is above $5,000. In other words, if every customer you bring in is worth $5,000 to you, then cold email outreach is definitely something to be considering. The industries where we know that we've gotten good results is enterprise SaaS, business brokerage, private equity, and marketing agencies. So here is AICO. This is how it all fits together. Really what AICO is a series of different tools that we have stitched together using low-code, no-code tools. Right now, we primarily use make.com as the connective tissue between different third-party tools, but I would also highly recommend N8N if you are comfortable with that. If this is your first time hearing about make.com or N8N, then I would recommend that you just stick with make.com, however. So with that being said, let's break this down. So the diagram you see in front of you really comes in a few sections. The very first section is the scrapers. That is the first 4 nodes you see here. In other words, these are the different sources that we scrape leads from. Next, we put all of the leads that we scrape into a central database. The reality is our database is really just a spreadsheet, but we put it all into a central database, and then we start working those leads, massaging those leads with different data enrichers. Using these data enrichers, we are able to validate the email addresses we might have and also find new email addresses for those leads that we don't have their contact information for. Once that's done, we send all of the data into clay.com and use OpenAI in order to customize the sales copy. And then from there, we put it into our sender of choice. For us, that's Smartlead, but we also recommend Instantly for this. And then we actually start the email campaign and start sending out the emails. And for those of you who are curious, we recommend Smartlead if you're an agency or have multiple campaigns selling multiple different kinds of products, versus Instantly if you're just using it internally to be selling a single product. Instantly is a little bit more beginner friendly, but Smartlead is very, very powerful. So that would be our recommendation. And the sender of choice, whether it's Instantly or Smartlead, they start mass blasting emails out using secondary mailboxes that we purchase from the following 7 different providers. Now, a lot of these are Smartlead specific because, once again, we use Smartlead, but these are 7 different providers that we use, and we like the diversity because it helps increase our deliverability. We'll be talking about that more soon. And that is all the different tools. Once it's stitched together, it actually runs completely on autopilot. With that being said, you don't have to be technical in order to run this process. In fact, all of these tools I'm sharing with you, or most of the tools I'm sharing with you here, they don't require any technical know-how in order to access them. Instead, you can do the whole process entirely manually. And in fact, for most people, I think it's much better if you just ran the process manually to begin with, so long as you're using these tools or other tools that have API access, so then you can automate it using low-code, no-code tools down the road. And for those of you who are curious, you can also use a QR code in front of you to access the more advanced diagram that shows the entire AICO process end to end. With that being said, let's dive right in. So now let's go through the AICO process one step at a time. Step 1, scraping the qualified leads. Let's break down everything that you see in front of you. So there are really 4 places where you will scrape the majority of your leads. At the end of the day, wherever you scrape, it's probably just going to be a variant of one of these 4. Either A, you can scrape leads from LinkedIn directly. Other data providers, whether it's Apollo or Zoom Info or other data brokers, for the most part, they are essentially glorified wrappers around LinkedIn. LinkedIn will have the most up-to-date data for the leads that you want to scrape. With that being said, it is harder to scrape directly, and they have a lot of anti-bot practices that can make it more difficult to scrape. Also, you won't automatically be getting a lot of emails when you're scraping it directly, but it's a really good source for data if you want very up-to-date data and if you have other ways of getting email addresses, which I'm going to be showing you later in this video. The second is scraping local business data, primarily from Google Maps. The third is directly from Apollo. You can also use Zoom Info here if you want, but we like to use Apollo primarily for ourselves. And the fourth one is any publicly accessible database. These are things like Zillow or a directory of different certified professionals, really any publicly accessible database that provides email accounts. So let's break down the tools that we use to scrape across all 4 of these different types of sources. So when it comes to LinkedIn scraping, there are really 2 types of LinkedIn scraping. Number 1 is that you can scrape it using your own account. If you're going to be scraping with your own account, you have a lot of control over the process, and it'll generally be relatively bug-free, but there is a chance that you can get blacklisted if you scrape too much. But if you're not scraping a ton of leads, then this is absolutely something that you can be doing. But if you plan to scrape a lot of leads, then I would recommend using a third-party scraper in order to do it. So what you're going to need to do this is you're first going to need a Sales Navigator account. These typically cost about $100 a month, but there are different providers out there where you can subscribe to it at a lower rate. One that I know of is AICO. So if you just Google this, then you should be able to find some different services that be willing to give you a LinkedIn Sales Navigator account without paying full price. They're essentially bulk resellers. After you have the Sales Navigator account, you would use a service like Phantom Buster in order to scrape the leads. Important to note, Phantom Buster does a really good job of putting out documentation on exactly what level of scraping you can expect from a regular LinkedIn account. So I would definitely be looking at their documentation for what scale of scraping it is that you want to achieve. And if it looks like their recommendations say that you're good, I would just go ahead and proceed with this, as it's going to be probably a pretty cheap way of proceeding and you have plenty of control over the process. Now, if you want to be scraping a lot of leads, let's say 10,000 plus leads a month, and once again, I would recommend check out Phantom Buster's most recent documentation on their recommended quotas before you decide this. But let's say you want to scrape a lot of leads. Then you're going to need third-party LinkedIn accounts or third-party scrapers that basically don't use your own LinkedIn account for the scraping. There are some different services out there. I've tried a few, and frankly, the only ones that I have found that are worth using are fairly technical. So the places where I have found them are on places like Rapid API and Appify. Both of them are essentially marketplaces for different APIs. For us, the one that we use is on the screen here. This might change in the future, and you should definitely do your own research, but we get good results from this one here. It's on Rapid API, and you can find the link to both the API as well as the documentation of that API below. This is definitely more for advanced users, however, and for people who have some low-code, no-code experience or some API experience before proceeding. The second source that we scrape leads from is Google Maps. This is really good if you want to be scraping local leads or local businesses. And for this, there's a lot of good scrapers out there. The one that we use is Outscraper. We bought it while it was on sale from AppSumo. It might be on sale when you're watching this video. Frankly, though, we don't use this a ton as we get most of our leads directly from LinkedIn just for the nature of a lot of our campaigns. But there are great scrapers out there for scraping Google Maps data. Lastly is if you scrape leads directly from Apollo. Now, the reason why you would want to be doing this is that Apollo A provides emails directly. That being said, Apollo's, even the ones that have supposedly been validated, frankly, are not that well validated. So you're going to have to revalidate the email accounts, which we're going to be getting to in a moment. But that is one benefit. They do provide a lot of email addresses. Also, I would say that their filters are a lot more advanced. It's much easier to be creating a advanced filter set that can really allow you to dial in your perfect lead, while LinkedIn, their filters are a little bit more broad in many cases. And so because of that, we end up using Apollo a lot, even though essentially very often their data is just directly scraped from LinkedIn, and LinkedIn ultimately has more up-to-date data. With that being said, when we scrape from Apollo, we use third-party scrapers. So moving forward, I think we're going to be switching over, frankly, to using a third-party scraper from a platform like Rapid API and Appify, just like we do with LinkedIn. With that being said, some services that we have used in the past that we have liked have been both enrich IQ and trusted leads. These are essentially third-party services that will scrape the leads on your behalf without you needing to have an expensive Apollo subscription. I believe that in order to scrape and export essentially 1,000 Apollo leads will cost you something in the ballpark of like $100, which is just not economical for most campaigns. While if you use a third-party service like enrich IQ or trusted leads, then you can be scraping those for $3 or $5 in the case of these two services. I haven't had too many problems with these two services, but with other services, I have sometimes had issues with when they scrape the leads. Sometimes they will mess up the filter set somewhat. As for example, you might want to only target business owners that have a certain number of years of experience. Sometimes those filters don't end up being honored inside of the scraping. So that is definitely something that you're going to be wanting to look out for, but I have not had any issues with enrich IQ and trusted leads personally. So that's why I'm vouching for these two. Next is public databases. So some examples of a public database you might want to be scraping is something like Zillow if you're going to be targeting real estate agents, or Crunchbase if you're targeting startups, or there's lots of certification services out there for different types of professionals. So for instance, there's an Exit Planning Institute for exit planners, and you can just go on their website and scrape all of their certified professionals, something that is quite a good idea depending on what your niche is. So for these public databases, we recommend using Zenrose. You can see here for us, we get plenty of mileage just out of the $70 a month subscription, and it's a good service for scraping public databases. Additionally, you can also scrape just directly off of make.com. There's a great tutorial by Nick Sarov. The link is in the QR code here. So if you just want to scan that QR code, you'll get a tutorial from Nick about how to scrape leads just directly from make.com. And that can be very, very effective as well. So that is ultimately how we scrape leads from all the different sources that we use in our campaigns. Wait till the end of the video when we show you the final price tag that we have had in the early days for these different tools and for all of our scraping leads. Step 2, how we enrich the leads. So these are the real tools that we use for enriching the contacts to get their email addresses and order to validate those email addresses. First, let's talk about email enrichment. For this, there are really two different tools that we would recommend. The first is bettercontact.rocks. So bettercontact.rocks is very effective. It gets a very high saturation because it's actually just a middleman between 20 other different sources. What do I mean by that? So there's a lot of different tools out there. There's hunter.io, Prospeo, which is actually something we're going to recommend. There's Lead Magic. There's a lot of different tools out there that will find you the email address of the person you're looking for. Essentially, you input their first name, their last name, and the website, and it will output what it thinks is the email address. Now, the way that all these different services work are essentially all pretty darn similar to each other. Essentially, what they are doing is that they are just pinging that server with different permutations of first name, last name. In other words, if you're trying to contact, let's say, myself at my Valhalla email address, you might ping that server saying, does Garrick at Valhalla exist? Does Garrick Tate at Valhalla exist? Does G Tate at Valhalla exist? And depending on the server settings, that server will actually answer saying yes or no to the different permutations. So essentially, they're all just doing the same thing. They're just different algorithms on that same concept. Additionally, sometimes they will also scrape the open web. This is now a little bit harder post GDPR, but but some of it's a bit hush-hush, I'm sure. But essentially what they do is they scrape the open web, find email addresses to learn what the pattern of different organizations are. So for instance, if you tell and find out that my email address is, let's say, gtate at Valhalla, it might be very easy to find the email addresses of other people in my organization, because you would find it goes first initial and then last name as the protocol of how they set their email accounts. So those are really the two ways that these services work. And what Better Contact Rocks does, so when you're using one versus the other, you can expect generally a similar result. With that being said, every different service does have different permutations of their algorithm and does have slightly different ways that they approach it. And so what Better Contact Rocks does is they use all 20 different providers, and then they waterfall enrich it, where if one fails, they try the next one. If that fails, they try the next one. If that fails, they try the next one. And so really you get the highest saturation of email addresses. In other words, if you give them 100 leads, they will probably get you 60 email addresses, while the other providers might be able to only get you like 50. With that being said, they are more expensive than the other providers out there. If you are not wanting to pay the extra dollar like we are willing to spend the extra money to get more email accounts, then we would recommend a tool like Prospeo, which has a cheaper cost per credit, but you will get a lower success rate of finding email accounts. So there is the question of, which one should you use? It really depends on the size of the campaign that you want to run and the size of your total targetable market, your TAM. So let's go through a quick thought experiment to see why you might choose one over the other. First, you need to decide what is the size of the campaign that you want to run. So let's pretend in this example that you want to run a campaign of 3,000 emails. You think that would be a good test for your campaign? Because at the end of the day, every campaign is just that. It's just a test. So you decide that 3,000 emails would be a good test. And at that point, you have to look at your total addressable market. You could be in a small market where when you scrape every CEO in the construction industry, you see there's only 6,000, not really that big of a market. If you're in that situation, you might want to use something like Better Contact Rocks, where you can expect to have a higher saturation, versus if you found that you are addressing a very large market, maybe like every CEO in America, then a much lower saturation is required. In fact, you would only need like 3% of, let's say, 100,000 leads in order to proceed with your test. So it's really just about the size of the campaign that you want to run, the total addressable market, and your budget. And from there, you can decide which one you want to use. After you enrich the leads, it's time to validate. So why do we validate our email addresses? What does that even mean? So the reason why we validate our email addresses is because if we don't, we're going to start having our emails bounce. And when our emails bounce, it's effectively telling Google and Outlook that our mailboxes are spamming people, because it essentially means we are emailing people that we don't know. If we had known them, then our emails wouldn't have bounced. We would have emailed a correct mailing address. And so if our emails bounce over and over again, it hurts our deliverability. We start ending up in spam more often. We start ending up on more blacklists, and our emails don't end up in the primary inbox. This will kill your email deliverability. So that's why we validate. Now, how do we go about validating? The way that we do it is we use really 3 different validators. We first use a fairly cheap validator in order to do the first pass. Then we go through a more of an expensive validator. And for the catch-alls, we use a specialized validator. For the cheap validator, we use Million Verifier. We like that because it's cheap, but still very effective. For the second validator, we like to use Zero Bounce. Now, the reason why we actually like to use Zero Bounce is that they will tell us if an email not only is no longer being used and might result in a bounce, but they also have a system for reporting on if an email address has been known to mark things as spam, at which point it will mark those as an abuse email, which allows you to avoid emailing those people in the first place. With that being said, Zero Bounce is a little more expensive. And so if you just want to go with the absolute cheapest, you could just go with Million Verifier and not be like us, which we double validate our email addresses. Really, the choice is yours. But what I do highly recommend is if you are going to also email your catch-alls, then you use a specialized tool like Scrubby. There are a few other tools out there on the market. Scrubby is what we've been using the longest. In the future, we might try something else, but for now, Scrubby works well for us. And if you're curious what a catch-all email is, essentially a catch-all email is just an email address that when you ping the server does not tell you if the email address is valid or not. So essentially, they are just unknowns. The only way to really validate them is that you have to email that address, wait for a while, and see if you get a bounce response. This is something that Scrubby, at least in the past, advertised that they do. Though when I looked at their website more recently, they don't advertise as strongly, so they might have changed their methodology for validating email addresses. There are a few other ways to do it, but they are relatively specialized. So now we have our lead list, and we have enriched and validated a bunch of email addresses that are associated with that lead list. The next step is to personalize your sales copy at scale with AI. This has been the game changer since large language models have been released. And for us, the tool that we use Clay for this. So you can see on the screen here, there's a QR code, and this QR code will give you access to our Clay template. This is the template that we use to start off new campaigns. And so that should speed you up immensely. But first, what is Clay? So Clay is essentially a spreadsheet where every single column is an API call. In other words, it's a way of managing multiple APIs and stringing them together with if-then logic. It has loads of uses, but the one we use it for is specifically to enrich extra details on our leads, scraping extra publicly available information on them, and also breaking down a complex prompt into multiple sub-steps. So this is what it looks like. So every one of these columns is an API call. For instance, this column right here, this is a column that triggers to a large language model, and it also scrapes the client's website. And then it uses the large language model to digest all that information and create a summary about what we know about that. From there, we infer their industry. And then from there, the next step is that we normalize their industry. So we make sure, for instance, that the industry only has 2 words in it, that it is a kind of industry title that you might put into a email account. So this whole chain of 3 different columns, 3 different prompts, is how we get our industry variable that we can then put into our email copy. So when someone receives an email from us saying that we have experience inside of the XYZ industry, it can be said in a way that is talking to them in their own language based on what we found from their website. So the way that we would use this is that when we are writing an email that is saying that we provide services to the XYZ industry, that XYZ variable is filled in based on what we know about them, based on what they self-reported on their own website, and then is normalized so that it actually sounds natural inside of a email. And then there are many, many other prompts and steps that we take that information through to write the final email output. Another way of looking at the same information is through a diagram like this. So this is a way of visualizing Clay data. It's something that you can see from your tables when you go into graph mode. And you can see here how the different steps of the Clay table all string together into a whole. In other words, it gives you a lot of power with different types of if-then logic. So really the power here is that you can create a lot of different personalized email types with the information that's publicly available on your clients. What is the template that you should be going off of? Well, it really depends on your industry. It really depends on your product, but a flow that you can always follow. This works very well for us across most of our clients. This is something that we always include inside of our early split test when we're split testing different types of emails. It goes something like this. The subject line should be something that they might expect to receive from a company or a coworker or a client. You shouldn't be lying in your subject lines, but you want a subject line that they would expect to see from one of those parties, because that is the most likely they're going to open up the email. That being said, if you don't know what to write, a default that's worked well for us is just their company name plus your name, introduction. From there, what the email should break down into is it should say how you found them, saying, for instance, hi Garrick, I saw you on LinkedIn. I saw that you made a post about AI and thought we should be connecting. From there, you go into the core line. So the core line can really be taken in one of 2 different directions. Either A, you ask a leading question. So for example, you are reaching out to sales managers and you're asking them about their lead quality, or you're asking a question about how they are sourcing leads. Or you can make a transformational offer. A transformational offer is how you would summarize your core service. Basically, your grand slam offer of I help X with Y in Z timeframe. Once you make that core line, you go straight into your risk reversal. In other words, you're saying we help X with Y in Z timeframe or your money back. Now, if you don't have a risk reversal, if you don't have a money back guarantee, you can also just give social proof here. You're giving a testimonial saying, we just recently helped X with this as well. Here's the results. And then from there, you have to actually give the call to action. This is just something as simple as asking them if this would be of interest to them, if they want to jump on a call, or something to that effect. Importantly, we do not include links ever inside of the email copy, because that definitely hurts deliverability. So the question is really just to start the conversation, and then from there you can send them the Calendly link or start suggesting times. And then from there you can add any additional information or personalization in the PS. I like to include some additional tidbits of personalization based on what we scraped about them inside of the PS. For instance, commenting about any case studies that they have, or any recommendations that they have on LinkedIn. So this is what it looks like. This is a real piece of campaign copy that we've used in a real campaign, and it works like this. So the red part is obviously the kind of dumb logic. Hi, first name. I saw your LinkedIn post on X, so I checked out your company and saw you help ABC with XYZ and wanted to connect. So this line is entirely personalized with AI. Basically what we find on their LinkedIn and their website, we give it to the large language model and it creates that from scratch. Then we say, I was looking for ABC companies in your area. Once again, that's something we can just scrape very easily from LinkedIn or from their website. And then from there, we transition to saying, I was curious, have you ever thought about selling your business? I asked because we have some buyers in our network who would want an XYZ business like yours. In this case, the XYZ is actually the industry, which we just showed you how that one variable gets filled in. We say they are seeking one with pre-tax earnings, reply, and we'll schedule a time. And the PS, it's just a very simple, we saw your case study. And this email has performed very well for us. And it's all personalized and empowered with large language models. So now let's transition into the last step, step 4, actually setting up your Smartlead or Instantly account and warming up your mailboxes. So for us, once again, we use Smartlead, but the same concept will work very well with Instantly as well. So whether you're using Smartlead or Instantly, you're going to need to set up a lot of mailboxes in order to send your emails from. The reason why you are going to be setting up mailboxes on secondary domains, that's important. You're not setting these up using your primary mailboxes. You're not setting these up on your primary domain, is that you are going to want to send a low volume across multiple domains, across multiple mailboxes. That improves deliverability a lot. If you're sending 10,000 emails from a single mailbox, that mailbox's deliverability is going to go through the crapper. So you want to do what's called horizontal scaling. When you are doing horizontal scaling, you can still set them up the mailboxes yourself using Google G Suite or Microsoft Office and set up a lot of Gmails or a lot of Outlook emails, but you're going to pretty rapidly hit a wall where that is just very hard to scale unless you are specializing in it. So if you're not specializing in it, then there are a lot to choose from. There are a lot of third-party vendors that offer this service. We ourselves have tested out about 9 and settled on about 7 that we really like. That being said, I would recommend not going that hard on it. Instead, what I would recommend, if you're just getting started, is just use the recommended Smartlead or Instantly mailboxes. Instantly was the first one to provide this as a service, where they would essentially give you access to their recommended vendors to set the mailboxes for you. In other words, it's entirely just click through on their platform, and then they will have the mailboxes created automatically for you and put into their system. Later on, Smartlead followed suit with Smart Senders, and they provide a lot of different vendors and a very wide variety of different mailboxes you can set up. So if I were you and just getting started, these would be the services I would use. Just a native Smartlead and native Instantly email accounts set up on their platform. If you wanted to, for instance, send about 10,000 emails a month and you want to set 52 mailboxes in order to do that, these would be the prices that you could expect. So once you have your mailboxes purchased, whether you get them from Smartlead or some other vendor, it's time to warm them up. So what is warming them up? Basically, what you're doing is that you are simulating the activity of a regular email account by sending off emails to other mailboxes inside of what's called a warm-up pool. So you're trading emails back and forth using auto-generated messages, and you're simulating the activity of a real email account. When you do this, it dramatically increases your deliverability. Industry standard is to warm up the mailboxes for about 2 weeks, though we do it for 4 weeks, and we have good results from that. Our mailboxes tend to survive longer before getting hit with deliverability issues when we warm them up for 4 weeks. Warm-up recipes, frankly, there's a lot of different warm-up recipes out there. This is the one that works well for us. There are also some recommended warm-up recipes by Smartlead, though they haven't updated their recommendations for a while, and I think there's some new information coming out. But if they update their recommendations in the future, definitely something that we would be testing ourselves. But this is what's worked very well for us for the last year. So what we do is across all of our mailboxes, we set them at sending about 20 messages per day with a minimum time gap of 20 minutes between each email sent. Important to note that is for our campaign emails. For the warm-up emails, we have a pre-campaign warm-up setting and a once a campaign activates warm-up setting. So for the pre-campaign, we ramp up by 5, which means that we're sending on day 1, 5, day 2, 10, day 3, 15, so on and so forth, until we hit about 50. And then once we hit 50, we send between 25 to 50 warm-up emails a day, with a reply rate of 40%. Important to note, this is without a campaign running. Once a campaign actually starts, during the campaign running, we will then send only 13 to 20 emails a day with a reply rate of about 90%. The reason why we do this is that we want the G Suites and Outlooks of the world to see not a dramatic shift from the day the campaign starts and the day before the campaign. So in other words, the day before the campaign, they're seeing a reply rate of about 40%. They're seeing about 25 to 50 emails a day. After the campaign is started, they're seeing about, I guess they're seeing less than 50 emails being sent. They're seeing between 33 to 40 emails a day, but they're still seeing a reply rate of about 40%. Because even if the campaign is getting very low replies, they're not seeing a dramatic shift in the reply rate since the reply rate has increased. So this has worked out very well for us and has kept our mailboxes pretty healthy. If any of this seems confusing, but you're using Smartlead, you can just see the screenshots in the slide deck here, and that will help guide you through the exact settings you should be turning on. All right, time for the big question. What is AICO's cost? So the end of all of this, these are the real costs that we pay out of pocket for campaigns. Every row here shows the associated costs with a campaign of different sizes. So this is how much we would be paying for a campaign of about 2,000 leads per month versus 5,000 versus 10,000. And then here you can see that breakdown of those costs, how much we pay on scraping leads, how much we cost on enriching leads, pay on validating, so on and so forth. And then here you can see it as it's summarized. So you could see throughout the whole presentation that we use a lot of different tools for different purposes, and the costs definitely do vary. So here is when we actually look at our real historical out-of-pocket expenses, how much it cost us, but it would range between these two extremes. So if you're going to be running a campaign of about 5,000 emails a day, you could expect about $1,873. However, it could range between $1,300 and $2,100 depending on how premium you were going. In other words, like if you have multiple redundancies like we do when we are validating emails, we validate our emails twice. So depending on the types of tools that you decide to use, you can expect as high as 2,100 or as low as 1,300. And these are the real costs. So we hope this gives you a solid idea of the expenses and whether or not it would be worth it to start your very own campaign internally. And that's it for today's presentation. I hope you found this helpful. You can scan the QR code on the screen in order to download these slides and reach out to me if you have any questions or if you would like our help in setting up your very own campaign. Cheers.